Hello and welcome, everyone. My name is Gail, and this is Being a Messianic Jew, where we're looking at the Hebrew roots in our Christian faith. Why do we look at the things we do? What did they mean to the Jews at the time of Jesus's era? And what do they mean to the Jews today? And what do they mean to us? And we've been looking at holidays, and now we're in the last part of the High Holy Days. We're in the last of the major feast days in the fall. Well, next to the last, we have one more after this. But now we're going to be looking at, we've gone through each of the different holidays. We've gone through Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur, and now we're at Sukkot. So today is the 5th of October here in the US. And tomorrow night, we start at sundown and we do Sukkot. And so that's why we're going to be talking about it. And then we have the other holidays after that. So we'll be coming to um, Simchat Torah and Shemina Atzeret, and we'll be going to those holidays next week. So we'll be talking briefly. We might touch on those a little bit today, but we're really focusing on Sukkot today. So Sukkot or Sukkot is a 7-day holiday, and it's a major holiday. The Torah commanded the Jewish festival begins 5 days after Yom Kippur, so it's on the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Tishrei. It's known as the Feast of Tabernacles, the Feast of Booths, and this particular holiday has two dual significance. It has two meanings to it. One of them, we look at the historical aspect. So this is celebrating the 40 years that the Israelites were wandering around in the wilderness after they left Egypt. And they lived in temporary shelters or booths. Um, it's also an agricultural holiday. So it's the festival of the ingathering, a harvest festival. It's called Hag HaSaref, and it's celebrating the bounty of autumn harvest, and it's thanking the Lord for all of the provision that He's done. So the key observances, and this we're going to be seeing a lot of different sukkahs. Sukkahs, there are some minimal requirements to them, but then you'll see everybody does them differently. So there's different pictures throughout this presentation about different types of sukkah, but they are temporary shelters. They're not supposed to be something you stay in for a long period of time. Just this holiday, you're supposed to dwell in it. You spend time, you eat your meals, and a lot of people sleep in them. Uh, and the single form, so there's sukkahs, which and that's the singular form of Sukkot, which Sukkot is the holiday, but it means many sukkahs. And it's a temporary outdoor home. It has the roof is always made of branches or foliage, and it allows the stars to be seen. There's actually a mandate, not in the Torah, but it's a traditional mandate of how many stars you have to see to be able to see out of. And it symbolizes the reliance on God's protection. We also have, and this is scriptural, the waving of the four species. Well, the Torah tells us to have the four species, and the tradition is reciting blessings while holding them and weaving a bundle of the four species and an etrog, and we'll be going into each one of those. It's often referred to as Zaman Simchat Torah. Excuse me, Zaman Simchatenu, and it's the season of rejoicing. I kind of ran that together. But it's a good time of celebration where everyone comes together and has fun. So this year, as I said, it is starting tomorrow night on Monday, October 6th, and it ends at nightfall on October 13th. Work is permitted on between the 9th and 10th, and then the 12th or 13th with certain restrictions. And it's because Hoshana Rabbah is on the October 13th, and that's why we have it limited. So again, it's a time of fun. It's a time of celebration. It's looking at this as how God has been so gracious to us. We just came out of a very somber, the holiest day of the year for Jews, which is Yom Kippur. So you had Rosh Hashanah, and then you went to Yom Kippur, where Yom Kippur is considered the holiest day of the year, where it's only once a year when the priest goes in and offers the sacrifices and to atone for the people's sins, so that their name is written in the book of life for the next year. And remember, it's only good for a year. And we don't have to do any of that because we have Jesus who paid for our sins permanently. We just, we are his bond servants. We are his. We are owned by him now. And so there's the difference. There's why we don't celebrate it in the same way. But there are some things we're going to be looking at what's required for this holiday and what are traditions. And then you have to ask the Lord what is where you should fall in that and if you should celebrate it at all or not. So, the final divine judgment, there is a mini Yom Kippur. Like I said, the new year is written on Rosh Hashanah and then it's sealed on Yom Kippur. But this is, I actually didn't celebrate this, but this one is it's been celebrated in many cultures and many Jewish congregations, where it's the finalization of judgment for the year. It's the last opportunity for the individual to merit a favorable decree. So you'll still see people doing solemn melodies and customs. The high holy days are revived on this particular day, and they'll also this is a time for focusing on rain because the world is being judged regarding the year's rainfall as well, which is so vital to the harvest. It's how if they didn't have rain, they would be starving. They were a total agricultural society, so they had to have rain. So you needed rain, and this is when the rain for the year was being sealed into the books, is what they believe. This is a tradition on that. That again, that's a tradition. So these rituals are deeply tied to prayers for blessed and fruitful year of rain. And they would make the Hakafot, which is the seven circuits around, and they would pray for salvation, and they would make seven circuits around the bima, the platform where the Torah is read, and they would walk around it. And then they had the beating of the willows, which we're going to be getting to. They had 5 willow branches, and they were beaten on the ground. And this is a custom which originated in the temple, is symbolic for prayer for water, which is also symbolic for casting off their sins. Again, those are traditions, and this holiday has a lot of traditions, but it does have some things that are required. So again, as you can see, all of the different sukkahs are some of them are very minimal, some of them are very elaborate. But the thing about it is, as I said, it is a holiday. It is a major holiday, and it is in the Torah for the Jews to celebrate. But how does it work for us? Well, we need to think about because just as they were celebrating the provisions that were given to them in the desert for the 40 years, we should think about that God gave us and he took with us. He provides for us. We should need to think about that. And we need to think about how God is with us in those times. So he dwells with us. We know that Jesus, who is Emmanuel, God is with us from John 1:14. This is God's present. And we also know that in Revelation chapter 21, that we know about the new heavens, new earth, where he's going to tabernacle with men, is the phrase that's used. We know that we talked about the Sukkot as a season of rejoicing. So we should be living joyful lives. We should be so grateful and so thankful for all of God's provision in our lives and our hope for the future home in heaven. Again, it's a spiritual pilgrimage. As Jews are celebrating that this was a temporary dwelling, we should remember that our home is not here. Our home is in heaven and celebrate what is yet to come for us. And which takes us into how do we celebrate this holiday? Again, you build a temporary structure in your yard, balcony, or communal space, and you're going to love it because in big cities, they have to build them on a balcony. It has to be under the open sky. It can't be not under a tree or roof, which that's where it kind of leans into the balcony thing that I'll be showing. It has to have at least 2 and a partial third wall, and the walls can be of any material as long as they're sturdy enough to withstand a normal wind. The roof has to be unprocessed organic material that is detached from the ground. You can use bamboo poles, fronds, evergreen branches. So I've seen it depends upon where you live of what you're using, because of course palm fronds if you were living someplace like in Israel, but here in the US, I've seen people use evergreens. I've seen just regular tree branches with leaves on them. I've seen different things. It can be totally different. And you can see in this picture that looks like evergreens possibly in this one, but they use different materials. A lot of people decorate it, and that's why they all look fun because this is supposed to be welcoming and it's supposed to be a fun place to be. The kids love to decorate it. It is one of the funnest things to watch them do. And again, they dwell in the sukkah. Many Jews eat all of their meals in the sukkah, and some even sleep in them. And I've even seen them sleep when the weather wasn't good. But typically, if the weather's good, you'll see them sleeping out with sleeping bags in the sukkah. The second major ritual is having the four species. So we're going to talk a little bit about etrogs, but it's a citron. It's in the oranges and lemon family, but it looks like a lemon, only bigger, and it has a really strong fragrance. And then you have the luav, which is a closed frond of the date palm, and then you have the sprigs of myrtle, and then you have two willow branches, and these are all bound together. And we're going to talk about whether this is tradition or whether this is commandment, but while holding the luav in one hand and the etrog in the other, they have a blessing that they say and they wave it in all directions, forward, backwards, left, right, up, and down, because they want to remember. This is the way they remember that God is everywhere and they show that God is everywhere. This is a time of remembrance. They also say the four species often are interpreted just as we had Passover, where you have the four children that represent different type of Jews. They say the four species represent different kinds of Jews who, despite their differences, are brought together in unity during the holiday, which I thought was a really neat way of saying that. So, the interesting thing is an etrog. So, what is an etrog? Um, the etrog is a very distinct fruit, and it's used for there's some key facts about it. It is in the, like I said, is in the citrus family. It's a non-hybridized. It can't be hybridized. Citrus fruit. It usually looks bumpy, and it's can be green, but it's usually yellow like a lemon, but it's larger than a lemon. And unlike other fruits, this is interesting about it. It's primarily composed of this thick, white, aromatic pith, or the right beneath the peel, and it has very little sour pulp or juice in size, but it's highly prized for its potent and pleasant fragrance. It has a very strong religious significance because it is one of the four species that is commanded in the Torah. It's to be taken and rejoiced with during the 7-day period of Sukkot, the Feast of Booths, and every day except Shabbat. This is when they hold it, and like I said, they hold all three of them. They wave them in the six directions. It's often seen, an etrog is often seen as representing the heart or a person that possesses both taste, the Torah knowledge and goodness, and the fragrance, their good deeds. The selection of these fruits, it has to be unblemished, it has to be in good shape. It can't be grafted into anything. There's a whole process for selecting these. But my first question about them is always, can you eat it? And by the way, these are rabbis that are actually studying them to see which ones are kosher and which ones aren't. So, can you eat it? Well, yes and no. Okay. Um, because it's not like a normal citrus fruit, like an orange, you can't just eat it. The pulp and juice, it doesn't have much pulp and juice, and it's really very sour if you eat it. The rind, though, is the main part, and it is actually edible, and it's mildly sweet, but has a unique, somewhat texture. However, you have to cook it and preserve it. You have to tenderize it because it's thicker than a lemon or an orange. It's real thick, and when you cook it, it will balance the flavors, and can be used as candied citrons, jams, marmalades, or infused liqueurs. But the thing about it is, the most of them are if you have your access to a citron or to an etrog, the thing about it is that ones that are used for Sukkot, because they have to be unblemished, they do use a lot of pesticides um, and fungicides to keep them safe, and so that they can have one that's unblemished. And because of that, if you end up getting one and you want to try cooking it, make sure you thoroughly wash it and scrub it because you just, like I said, there's a lot of pesticides on it. I personally wouldn't recommend doing it, but if you want to try it, you can. So then a little bit more about it. So I was looking to see how much do they grow, and because it's not a fruit you hear of. It's not something you see in the store. It's, because you can't just eat it like normal fruits. So I was looking to see how many tons they produced of it, but that's actually really kind of hard to do because it's sold as one etrog, and then a lot of times you buy a kit where you have the glue of the wand along and with the etrog together. So you have the four species all in a kit. But there was one estimate that shows Israel exports approximately 350,000 etrog annually and sells double that amount locally. It's believed they have over 1 million etrog for the holiday. This is an older report that shows 70% of Israel's market exploited, so this is about 10 years ago, exploited 100,000 etrog just to the US. What's interesting about them, because I was showing that it's very strict halachic law, Jewish law requirements. So the farmers actually say that only a small percentage of the harvest, sometimes only 1 in 10 of their fruits, are suitable for ritual use. That means they have a lot of extra fruit that's grown. And that's why it was really hard to figure out what to do with them or how much is produced because they do focus on the individual aspect of it. And it's not about the size of it, though that can be fun. But the weight of an etrog varies. So the thing is, it's how important it is and how unblemished and how there are certain aspects to it. Um, what's interesting is etrogs are grown in other regions, especially in Italy. And I hope I don't butcher the name of the city, but I think it is Calibra and Morocco, where they get them from. There are many uses for the fruit, as I said, and the most common is culinary, which is, like I said, the candied fruits. With they actually will make fruit cakes. They make it an Italian cake out of it, and they make a lot of the for the dried fruit that you have for the holiday. If it says citron, that's what it is. And there's jams and marmalades, and it's a very popular tradition to use the holiday. After the holiday, people will use their etrog to make jam and marmalades. And as I said, it can be used in flavorings and liqueurs where they steep it down. There's a really popular, I guess, in Israel, an etrog infused vodka. And there's also one in Italy that is used for the etrogs. And the syrup can be made a fragrance syrup to be drizzled over desserts or mixed into beverages like tea or soda and give you a real citrusy, lemony taste. It's also used for aromatics. It's used for a scent. A lot of times they'll take the citrog rind with the whole cloves and make a spice box. And they'll use it in the Havdalah ceremony, which marks the end of the Sabbath. And they'll use that because you can use it for a long time as the beautiful scent. It can be used, it's often used as air fresheners and potpourri. They'll take slices of the fruit or the whole fruit just naturally in a room to do it, but then it also can be used commercially to do that. It's also used in perfume and in cosmetics. So it's kind of interesting some of the different things. And traditionally, again, you have to cook it, but it could be used as a digestive aid to help with nausea, seasickness, and other digestives. And it was actually used to combat scurvy because it has such a high vitamin C content. A lot of times, and because it's so big, it could treat a lot of people. So they actually would take etrog on the ships. So it's kind of interesting on different things about that. There's also the women. The reason they would also make the jam after Sukkot was because a lot of times they believed that it was aid in an easy childbirth. And it's also used in Tu B'Shvat, or the year of the trees. They'll eat a candied etrog there to celebrate the fruit of the trees. And then other cultures use it as well. So, just a little bit about that. And then I thought I'd give you some fun facts. So, because an etrog is such a unique fruit that's something we don't always see. What's interesting is the Torah is very vague about what it is. The Torah just tells us to take the fruit of a beautiful tree, and the oral tradition dates all the way back to Moses at Mount Sinai, who they believe took an etrog. And the Talmud and biblical commentators have various insights to show how this is understood from the text. Um, but we don't know if it truly is the etrog, but that is the tradition and that is the custom from the oral traditions, and that's why we use the etrog and not a lemon or any other fruit. Interestingly enough, there's a tradition that says that it's the biblical apple. And other areas of the Torah, the scripture mentions a sweet smelling fruit, and I think it's called topaz. But it's identified as an apple. However, a lot of Torah scholars believe that that actually is etrog because there's another mention, and they think that's where the two get to. They think that they know when Jacob went to his father Isaac, pretending to his brother Esau, tradition says he carried the scent of that orchard, and they believe that was an etrog orchard from the words that were used. Ancient Greek writers used etrog in Persian as a median apple, so that's why many believe that it may have been the apple that was in the Garden of Eden. As I mentioned earlier, they don't graft it. They can't do anything to make it better or to do anything. It has to be pure. So, in order for it to be kosher, it has to be that. They actually do have rabbis that are specialized in looking at this. And even when you buy one, you're looking at it very carefully because you want to make sure that it's beautiful. You want the most beautiful one with perfect shape and an unblemished skin. It actually requires a lot of sunlight and warm temperatures, just like all citrus fruits, to grow. So most of them that we have today come from the Mediterranean region, such as Israel, Italy, Morocco, and Greece, as I said. And the reason that's important, tradition says that there's a very Chabad tradition that showed that God instructed Moses when he was instructing him how to do the 4 species, which we're going to be looking at the scriptures. He actually sent messengers. Moses sent messengers to Italy to get an etrog, and that's why many people will get etrogs from Italy for that reason, because it has a very strong pedigree. And because of all of this, and because there's so much importance on this, it can be pricey. While you can get for under $50 and around $50 most of the time, you can get a wholly kosher etrog, and you can even get them on major websites and things. You should make sure it's a kosher one. But the perfect appearance, the perfect everything can cost several $100s. What's interesting, and the reason I have the picture up is they have I always thought it was Pitum because it's Pitum. However, when I went to look it up to find out how to say it, it's actually spelled Python, like Python, but with an N, Python. But it is, if you look, okay, here's the stem where it grows on the tree. It has to have this little tail on it, and that makes it kosher and more valuable. If it falls off naturally while still on the tree, then it's still kosher. But if it falls off after you picked it, then it's no longer kosher. And so, like when they're picking them and harvesting them, they have to be so careful. And this is where so many are discarded because they don't have that. Has some metaphorical meanings because it can mean a spiritually laden Jew. The Midrash draws a connection between the 4 species, as I said, and the 4 types of Jews. The etrog is represented in these traditions as being the ideal Jew who excels both in Torah study by the taste and also in the mitzvah or following the rules and the laws and how observant they are. And that's symbolized by the scent. And again, so the 4 species together, many people believe it represents the importance of the Jewish unity. All Jews are different, just like all Christians are different, but they are all Jewish. And just as we are Christians, there is it's interesting because the Hebrew letters of the word etrog form an acronym for the verse. And let not the foot of arrogance approach me. And this teaches that especially etrog Jews admired for their positive qualities and should remain humble and not allow their achievement to allow pride come into it. And as I said, this is a mitzvah for every Jew. You have to have the sukkah, and you're supposed to have the 4 species. And there are many other traditions as well. The other tradition is rejoicing. Zaman Simcha Tseneinu. It's a season of rejoicing. We know in Deuteronomy 16, verse 14 through 15, you shall rejoice in your festival. You, your son, your daughter, your male, your female servant, the Levite, the stranger, the fatherless, the widow who is within your gates, so that you may all together joyfully. They want to be, we celebrate. And in Leviticus 23:40, we rejoice. Oh, I have a misspelling, but we rejoice for the Lord your God for 7 days. And reason I had that is I was copying it and remember that often Hasidics and very conservative Jews will never put the valve in there. And that is how come I have a valve and a mark in it. The other aspects we talked about include having the meals in the sukkah and dwelling in it. And it's a lot of fun. I mean, this is one of the really fun times. And next year, I'm going to see about how we can do this as a group. But this is a time where you're actually going and celebrating together in your sukkah. And maybe some of us have different sukkahs and we come up with a way. But we'll think about it through this year if we want to do something next year for that. Because it's really fun to do, especially with kids. They really like it. One of the other traditions is the welcoming of the guest. And that is actually very important. It We know in Deuteronomy 16:14, it tells us we are commanded to rejoice. It tells us to bring all these people in. And we, Ushpezins, and we're bringing Abraham and Isaac. And there's a tradition of extending to all of the people that you can with this holiday and inviting them into your sukkah. Remember Abraham, he he would run out and he would welcome people. He was running out there and welcoming, and that's where the angels came to him. And he killed the best lamb. He was preparing the best food for guests. We should also take that and have that tradition of welcoming guests and having that into our lives. There is the biblical mandate for this holiday, and you can read about it in Leviticus 23:33 through 34 or 44. But again, on the first day, you shall take the fruit of the pleasing trees in verse 40 and make booths of them. Branches of palm trees and boughs of thick leafy trees. And that's why I said different people use different leaves and things on that, and willows of the brook. And you'll rejoice before your Lord your God for 7 days, verse 41. And you shall keep the feast of the Lord 7 days in the year, a statute throughout this is forever throughout your generations. So even we've talked about even for a Messianic Jew or somebody that has accepted Jesus into their lives, they still have to celebrate this. It doesn't stop. If you're Jewish or if you have converted, you still have to celebrate this holiday because it's throughout all generations. And you shall keep it in the seventh month. 42, you shall dwell in booth shelters for 7 days. All native Israelites shall dwell in booths. 43, that your generations may know that I made the Israelites dwell in booths when I brought them out of the land of Egypt. I am your Lord your God. Thus Moses declared to Israelites to set the appointed feast. So this is one of the feasts that is required. There are certain feasts that are required that we have to do, and this is one of them. But again, this is not required for Christians. So again, you're celebrating. And look at this one. This one's a little bit different. And I disagree with kind of on the top. I'm not sure what they have on the top. They have some plants there. One of the interesting things is, so how different are they in different places? We know in Leviticus 23 we have to do this, but they are different everywhere. Every person does them, they're different. One of the this largest sukkah in the world is claimed by different communities every year, but consistently cited is the one in Jerusalem Square. It's put up by the Jerusalem municipality. It is 800 square meters or about 8,611 square feet. It can accommodate 650 people at one time. This large-scale sukkah is a public fixture during Sukkot holiday, and it has numerous events and activities. There's also, and this one's kind of a iffy one, the world's largest indoor sukkah. Remember, you're really supposed to be seeing stars, though. And it's built annually at the Waldorf Astoria Hotel in Jerusalem and measures 400 square feet, about 4,300 square feet, and reaches 5 meters high. But again, each one looks different, and every one of them is slightly different, but there's certain rules about them. And this is why I said that. Even if you live in an apartment, so this is in Brooklyn, it's actually all over the buildings you'll see these, but they're temporary little ones. The only thing, the question is the tradition about seeing the stars. It doesn't say that as much, but this is why they have them and they'll decorate them different ways. But you are supposed to gather for 7 days. And there is a lot of historical observations as well. So in Deuteronomy 16, 18, or 16, 13, 15, again, it's the time of rejoicing, and we do have to rejoice and go with this. But then also there's another one about going to Jerusalem. So in Zechariah 14, verses 16 through 19, and everyone who has left all the nations came up against Jerusalem shall even go from year to year to worship the King, the Lord of hosts, to keep the Feast of Tabernacles or booths. So again, even in Zechariah, we're hearing about this holiday. Verse 17, and it shall be for those of the family of earth not to go up to Jerusalem to worship the King, the Lord of hosts. Upon them there would be no rain. So there was a curse put upon you if you didn't go to Jerusalem. 18, and if the family of Egypt does not go up to Jerusalem, present themselves, upon there shall be no rain. For there shall be a plague from which the Lord will smite the nations that do not go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So in this one, it is actually talking about others, that not just the Jews celebrating this. And verse 19, this shall be the consequence, punishment of the sin of Egypt, and the consequent punishment of the sin of nations that do not go up to keep the Feast of Tabernacles. So there is this one is there about actually going to Jerusalem. And I thought this would be a little interesting for you to see how each one of the 4 species is spelt, and how you see the English translation and where it's found in Leviticus 23:40. On the first day, you shall take the fruit of the beautiful trees, the branches of palm trees, the boughs of the leafy trees, and the willows of the brook, and you will rejoice before the Lord your God for 7 days. It doesn't say to actually wave it in all directions. That part is a tradition, but gathering the species for Jews is required to do that. So I always thought it was very fascinating that the Torah doesn't actually tell them what to do with them, just that they're supposed to have them. And it's just a beautiful time of having it. So this is where they came up with the practice of binding them together and waving them, was then they have something to do with it. It is a rabbinic tradition. It's mentioned in the Talmud and then later legal codes. And they use this to fulfill the commandments to rejoice before the Lord, using the species and symbolizing God's sovereignty over all creation and in all directions. So that's how they accomplish that. One of the other things is, so I've been telling you a lot about etrogs, but I almost forgot about it's an etrog. They are different sizes, and the most famous typically come from the Yemenite. They're the Yemenite variety, and they tend to be larger. They're naturally producing massive fruits. Sometimes they reach the size of a regular large melon. So think about it. What looks like a lemon is the size of a watermelon. That's how big, and they're growing on trees. So it's used in the communities, if the Moroccan communities, very frequently. And the other ones, a lot of those will be smaller. But one of the reports I found of a large etrog sold for a record price of $18,000 in 2023 auction. And the record is the price paid, but it didn't give the physical size of that particular fruit. But we know that the largest one that was grown, it was groundbreaking record reporting in Israel, and it was in the Guinness Book of World Records for 10 pounds or 4.5 kilograms. They are huge. And that's how much importance they put on this. So it's a very unusual thing to look at it. Again, the Torah doesn't say it has to be a etrog, but that's what the meaning is, what the belief is. It so let's say if God leads you wanted to celebrate and you can't get an etrog, eh, it doesn't say it has to be an etrog. It says it has to be a beautiful fruit. So I'm going to leave that with the Lord on that one. And again, we'd really talk about the rejoicing. This is a fun holiday. We just came out of Yom Kippur, which is the solemn day, which is, where we're actually asking God's forgiveness. But now we're into rejoicing. We're dancing, we're singing, we're having fun. We have lots of food. That's the best part. Lots of food. And you're getting the kids love staying out in the sukkah and having a good time. So the command is altogether joyful, is unique to the Sukkot holiday and reflects the relief and gratitude of the harvest season, as well as a sense of peace and closeness to God after you're looking from the previous holidays. So then I started looking, can we find any historical evidence of this holiday? And if you look right there you go. There's the etrog and there's the luав. So there's ancient artifacts. What's interesting is we can actually find the ancient artifacts from the first to the 5th century era and coins, tombstones, mosaics, where we can see them. But you actually don't get a clear picture of a sukkah. I mean, that we're not sure if that's a sukkah or not because it doesn't really look like it. But we don't actually see that until, believe it or not, medieval illustrated manuscripts from the 13th to 15th centuries in Europe, and that's where they find those. So we do see them in history. And this biblical coin there, that actually has it has the luav and etrog on it, and it's actually kind of cool because it's from the let's see, it's Bar Kokhba revolt. It's in 132 to 135 CE, so after Jesus's death. And on one side, it does have the Ark of the Covenant, the temple. That's what you see in this. And then the other side is saying the etrog and luav, and it says to the freedom of Zion. So there are many other coins, but that's a great one. I just thought that was fascinating that you can actually find things with this information on it. So during the temple period, they had the second temple. It was a magnificent pilgrimage festival. There was actually a special ceremony, the water libation was added. This is where they added this was a tradition, and the priests were drawing and pouring the water onto the altar. It was a prayer for rain for the coming year's crop. That's Again, that was during their time, and that wasn't a required. And then they still do this. A lot of times they'll say Psalm 113 through 118 during this holiday. Now, because we don't have the temple, we focus more on building the Sukkot or the Sukkah and having this and having a joyous celebration and having the 4 species. So it actually has changed a little bit on how it's celebrated because you don't go to Jerusalem now. You can, but you don't. And remember, I was telling you there's different ones. There's actual ones you can buy where the portable tents, basically. So the Christian application. In John 1:14, the word became flesh and dwelt among us. So if you use the Greek word there, it's actually tabernacle to pitch a tent. So it connects Jesus' incarnation with the very essence of Sukkot, God's desire to dwell with humanity. And then John 7, on the last day of the feast, Jesus stood and proclaimed, "If anyone is thirsty, let him come to me and drink. Rivers of living water will flow from within him." So that's a very direct public statement in the middle of the water libation ceremony. So where he's at Sukkot himself, and he's identifying himself as the ultimate source of spiritual life. And then we also can see Sukkot as a prophetic vision. In Revelation 21, 3-4, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, where they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as God. He'll wipe away every tear from their eyes, and death will be no more. Neither shall be any mourning, nor crying, nor pain anymore, for the former things have passed away. So this one uses the same word tabernacle language that was used in John chapter 1, verse 14. So it's interesting that John, when he was writing that, he used the same word. So it's obviously and all the disciples were Jews, so they would have known about this. They would have been celebrating this themselves. There's other ways, practical ways that we can consider celebrating. You can build a sukkah. You don't have to because it's just not required. But I would take this as a time of Thanksgiving. This is a harvest festival, and for here in America, for example, I just went to a fall festival this weekend. It's the end of the harvest season, and it's a time of celebration. Enjoy that and thank the Lord for all the provisions He's given to you, all of the blessings He's given you, and the things you have. And reflect on God's dwelling. Use the week to meditate on the theme of God with His people, from the old tabernacle to the person of Jesus and what we see in Revelations, and celebrate Jesus as the living water. And how we are able to have the Holy Spirit in us. How wonderful is that? As I said, ask the Lord, but this is some things to consider as you're talking to the Lord about it. But taking the week to thank the Lord for all He's done for us, and that all He continues to do and will be doing for us even in the future. I think it's just a great holiday for just saying thank you. Thank you for all you've done. Um, the first day of Sukkot is considered, and you can see in the ceiling in this really good where you can see the light. It's where no ordinary work is done. And there is also sacrificial. Book of Numbers in chapter 29. There's a very specific animal sacrifices that have to be offered each day of the festival. Of course, we don't have a temple, and of course, we don't do that. And as I said, it's agricultural based in Exodus 23:16. So this is the Feast of the Ingathering too. So there's a lot of agricultural points to this well. So basically, remember that it starts tomorrow night and it goes for 7 days, and remembering God's faithfulness. So, we're remembering that God is always there for us. And remembering, if you are Jewish, then you would have to do the Sukkah and the four kinds, and just remembering God and having fun and a joyous holiday. Those are the things that are required. And like I said, remember this, and you can, if you decide to build a sukkah, you can get real fancy, like this one here, or it can be very simple. That's fine. But again, there are the scriptures that we should look at. But rejoice, have fun with it. If you're going to celebrate the holiday, have fun with it. And think of this. I think of you had this time of the judgment. You had the sealing. And it is the time of judgment. But now you're in the time of rejoicing. And as we've been studying the book of Luke, and we have the hospitality. Jesus instructed his hosts to invite those who cannot repay him, the poor, the crippled, the lame, and the blind, in Luke 14, verse 12 through 14. Well, guess what? That's one of the things we're supposed to do. So in Deuteronomy 16:14, we're supposed to be welcoming them in. And this is a great time to remember we're supposed to be welcoming them in. The sukkah is, like I said, it's very temporary. It's very vulnerable. You can see most of them, they're not built to last. So they're going to fall over strong wind. Like we had a really strong wind yesterday. If I had a sukkah in the backyard right at that moment, it could have fallen down because there was such a strong wind. But we want to make this place as a welcoming. This may be temporary, and maybe, this is a temporary time for us here on earth, but make it a welcoming time while you're doing that. It's a great time to be thinking about that. And then when we were looking at Luke 14:15 through 24, it's the parable of the great banquet. Um, the host, after his initial guest declined the invitation, sent the servants. They went and looked for people. So when you're looking at Luke 14, it's talking about that. Again, it's the Feast of Ingathering, and it's has a very strong end times dimension. Zechariah really talks about at a time when all nations will stream to Israel. They're going to go to Jerusalem to celebrate Sukkot. And when you think about that, we know the Antichrist will be there at the temple. We know that people are going to be streaming in there. And we also have the great banquet. And that's when you have the Messianic feast, which most people believe. And that's when the ultimately redeemed in God's kingdom. So the poor and the marginalized, the people, the least amongst us, are the ones that may be first, and the first may be last. And this is where this really comes into. So remember, there's two central rituals here. It's the Sukkot and the waving of the four species. That is what is required. And then we also want to remember God's protection, and we want to celebrate, and we want to have fun. We want to have fun with this. This is a fun holiday. This is, we do have some somberness to it, but for the most part, this is one of the funnest holidays that is in the Jewish calendar. So again, we've talked about these, but there's different ways to do it. And if you decide to do a sukkah, it can be as fancy as you want or as simple as you want. It's really up to you. But think about, and maybe you just celebrate without anything. Because again, you don't have to. This is not a requirement for Christians. It's not a requirement at all, but it is a good time to remember the Lord. So that brings us to our letter today. And Samech is the 15th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. It has an S sound, but it's a symbol of support, protection, and memory. Well, and it's very interesting when you look at that one. The root word of it means to lay, lean, rest, support, put, hold, uphold, or lean upon. It's the verb that's used in the phrase laying on of hands. And we see this in Deuteronomy 34:9, when Moses laid his hands on Joshua. To lay your hands on someone in that time meant a form of consecration. So it also had the idea of supporting them. Moses was giving his support to Joshua. So this letter is the meaning of shield. Thorn bushes we use for shepherds. So when you have Psalm where you're having the thorny protection, God's protection, and where they would build a wall or shield to protect and grab hold. And you can see that's why it's in this circle thing like that. It's to hold on and to protect. So the sage saw that as the heart of God, which upholds and supports us, just like a circle that has no beginning or end, neither does God. And they see that in Psalm 37, verse 17, and in Psalm 54, verse 4. And we know that the Messiah is our shield in Psalm 3, chapter 3, verse 3, and in Psalm 18 and verse 2. And then we know, if you look in chapter of Romans 11, verse 16, that we know that the Lord is our protector and the shield. So the shield is mentioned there. So we know that this is a letter of protection, and that's what they talk about. It also can represent a wedding band, and the rings symbolize the couple's commitment to each other. So during a Jewish wedding ceremony, the bride will circle around him 7 times under the chuppah, their wedding canopy, and it symbolizes her uncompromising support of her husband. So that's why it has the circle and what it means for that. So I hope that this helped answers questions about this holiday. And I am going to first open it up to um, the. I'm going to open it up to Pastor Henry and to the elders if they'd like to talk about Sukkot and what it means.
Hello, Gail. Thank you for the class. Sorry, I missed a part of it. But what really stood out to me was the reference of John 1, that Jesus came and he dwelt among us. And that word was the word about tabernacle, that he tabernacled with us, that God's presence with us. It is good to have this linkage with these festivities, and to remember that Jesus indeed dwelled with us. I find it quite encouraging, because in the whole tapestry of the plans that the Lord has, the very presence of the Lord Jesus was foretold, yes, thousands of years before, but it was also that as he tabernacled with his people, we now have a chance to enjoy the presence of God. So that linkage brings Jesus again the intercession between the Jewish people and the Gentiles, because through him the Gentiles now also have this possibility to enjoy God's presence, and in so many ways. But that was really a key point for me, to see Jesus as a center figure through whom we can enjoy God's presence. So that was what stood out to me. So thank you.
Thank you, Pastor Henry. I'm glad that the Lord kind of directed me towards looking at the New Testament when I was looking at this, because typically when you're looking at it, you're only looking at what the Jews do to celebrate. But there really is a lot for us as Christians as well. And it's interesting. It's one of those holidays where Jesus was there. It mentions, that he was there during that holiday. And it's a subtle reference. It's not a direct reference like it is in Hanukkah, but there is a reference that Jesus was there in Jerusalem celebrating, and also in Passover, it was a very direct reference. So thank you for that. Any of the other elders have anything? Okay, we have a smaller group today. So I did have a question that somebody had given me about how does the synagogue support the poor in the community now? There is it's called tzedakah. It's justice, charitable giving, and they do tikkun olam, which is repairing the world. And so, for example, there is regular, there are offerings at times for things like that, but rather than take offering plates every week, they actually, you pay your tithes. You pay them, you can pay them once a year, you can pay them once a month, however you want to do it. But it's actually not done during the service. It's not usually done during the service unless it's a special offering. For example, at the synagogue I went to, I'm trying to think what it was. There was a big disaster. Oh, I know. It was when we had the tornadoes, and there was some people that lost their home, and so there was some special offerings taken up for that. So there's different ways they do that. They also, a lot of times, depending upon the community, first off, all of them are giving back to Jerusalem to help the poor people in Jerusalem. And keep in mind that there are a lot of people that they're doing grants and things for people to be able to study the Torah. Back in the old time, we talked about the Pharisees and the Sadducees. And if you were the house of Levi, then people were supporting you because you were from that house. Otherwise, you had to have a rich sponsor, maybe your family or someone was sponsoring you. And now they have they still can have somebody sponsor them, but a lot of times they have grants and scholarships and different things like that. So there's a lot to putting back into the education and a lot into the arts in the community. So you will see in Jewish communities there's a lot of other ways they're helping them, but they also will have food drives for the local pantries. For example, my synagogue, we would go on Christmas. We actually went because it was hard to get people to volunteer on Christmas, and we didn't celebrate Christmas. So we went on Christmas and a lot of the holidays to the food pantries to help the homeless. Not even that was one of the things they sponsored. They a lot of times will have homeless shelters and different things, or else they may tie into other communities or to the communities, homeless shelters and food pantries. It depends upon how big a community you're in too. So if you have a very small Jewish population, they're just going to donate to the local communities. But if they are a larger one, say like you're in Brooklyn, then they actually have some of their own things, and they have the synagogues have routine tzedakah collections to collect for those efforts. Um, but it can be a lot of different things. And I know sometimes we had where you would bring in supplies. Especially, I remember the reason it sticks in my mind is because we had several disasters in the city I lived in, and there were different boxes that you would put in. There also is a lot of self sufficiency and economic justice in their communities. They believe in giving you financial assistance and loans to help build up, and they try to keep them interest free. Mainly for Jews, keep that in mind, it's their own people. They can also do emergency grants, but the interest-free loans, they'll do them for small business, education, medical, or housing-related needs, but they are loans, and it'll do them that way. I know the one I went to had a lot of counseling. They also had job training. I remember that they had this program where they actually were doing a lot, how they would train people to go and interview and to do different things like that. So they did a lot of things like that. The other thing that they will do is in the community, because it was a large Jewish population where I lived, there was actually a nursing home that was all Jewish, and there was actually a Jewish hospital. And the Jewish hospital, it took anybody, but it was kind of funny because they actually had a kosher and a non-kosher kitchen. So when you went into the dining room, you had to know which side of the rooms to go on, and then it would say kosher on the wall, and it would be in Hebrew, and you had to know that that's where the kosher food was because it had its own kitchen. And again, I talked about Tikkun Olam, where they repair the world, and the synagogues actually work towards social justice. So they'll have social action committees, they'll have coalition building. They're looking for affordable housing, ways to reduce poverty and financial literacy, and there's things like that that they're working. They have a huge, and they have a huge. What is it called? Hebrew Immigration Aid Society where they're giving a lot to that. They also give a lot to I know when 2 years ago, when unfortunately when Sukkot, when the attack happened in Israel, that there was a lot of giving to the medical and of course giving to the military, the IDF, the Israeli Defense Force, giving money to them and giving care packages and things to them to help them out. So there's a lot of things they do like that. So I hope that answered the question on that. Uh, um, Anybody else have any other questions or anything they wanted to ask or say about this particular holiday? Okay. All right. Well, like I said, remember this is a fun time and a time of celebration. And whether you celebrate it or not, I hope that you take the time to do this. And I did want to go back. We have one last holiday. Well, it's two, technically two holidays. But let me go back here and show you this again. But next week, we are at the end of the High Holy Days, and we will be ending with our last holidays. And there's two holidays that are in the same time. So we will be looking at the eighth day of assembly and the rejoicing with the Torah. And that's where we end the annual cycle of reading the Torah. For example, I was just reading the Torah portion today, and it's when Moses is actually he was actually blessing Joshua, and he was telling them that God had just told him that he was going. God told him to look out over the land of Israel, but he was not getting to go in there, and he was telling him to go up to the mountain to die. So that is the time we are getting into here, of where we're ending the cycle of reading, and so next week we start all over with reading the Torah. So it's a fun, and that's also a fun holiday because we have the solemn closing. So you start with the solemn closing, the eighth day of the assembly or the eighth day of Sukkot. So you have that solemn time, but then we have the fun time of celebrating, rejoicing that the Lord gave us the Torah and gave us His word. So, uh, okay. Um, and I think that's all we have for today. And is there any last ones that anybody wanted to say? Okay, so somebody asked me, and I'm going to go ahead and just say this. So somebody asked me, and I'm going to go ahead and say it. Yes, it is my birthday tomorrow on Sukkot, which is so much fun. I get to have my birthday is almost always around the holiday. And thank you for wishing me happy birthday. But keep in mind, we don't really Jews don't really celebrate birthdays much. So we do celebrate it some, but it's not really a big thing. Here in America, they celebrate it more than anybody else does. Typically, Jews just don't celebrate birthdays. We A birthday is a celebration. The reason is because a birthday is a celebration of the day you were born. I should be saying thank you to my mom, on that day. But yes, it was the day I was born. But on my birthday, we celebrate. when people die of all the things they've done, because we want to see all the things that you've done with, like, we've talked during when we've been studying the book of Luke. We've been talking a lot about how important it is, with much is given. When you have received much, much should be done, much should be given. And that's why we spend more time in the Jewish culture of celebrating a person's death than we do their birth. So that's why. But thank you. Thank you so much for that. Anybody have any questions or any other things before we close for the day? All right. All right. Well, like I said, I hope you take the time to think about this holiday and think about how wonderful it is, all of the wonderful, wonderful things the Lord has done for us, and how He has blessed us so much. We live in such a time as this, and the Lord has blessed us that we get to see the end times. I know some people are scared of that, but I think of it as a time of celebration, a time of thank you, Lord. Thank you so much for all that we get to do and all that we have and all that we see. What a blessing. What a blessing to get to see this. We're going to we're in the time where we get to see the witnesses. We get to see everything happen. We get to see the rapture. People have been waiting for centuries to see the rapture and to see these times. How blessed are each one of us? And as you go through this week, I would take the time to say, thank you, Lord. Thank you so much for all that you do. Thank you for that. So, on this holiday, that's what I would be focusing on. And so, thank you. And thank you, everyone, for wishing me happy birthday. And so, yes, I get to celebrate. How cool is it that I get to celebrate Sukkot on my birthday? So, yay. All right. Well, let's go ahead and close in prayers. Oh, Lord, thank you so much. Thank you for the wonderful season, the season of celebration. We've gone through Yom Kippur, which is a time of repentance and remembrance and a solemnness of checking to see if we had any open doors, checking to see if there was anything that needed to be cleared out, because we want to make sure that our wicks are trimmed as the brides. One of the 10 virgins, we want to make sure that our wicks are being trimmed and that we're being ready. And that's what Yom Kippur was a good reminder for us, is that time of getting ready and making sure that we're ready for your coming. Now we get to celebrate, and we get the dancing, and we get the fun, and we get to celebrate for all that you've done for us and what a blessing you've been to us and what we get to continue to do and the fellowship we get to have. We are so blessed because we get to have you in our lives and get to celebrate every day with you, but have this as a special time of remembering that blessing that we have and how important that is. You are so good to us, Lord, and use this as a time to remember, hey, you've given us much. We're at the wedding banquet. We need to make sure we're going out in the street and we're helping people and we're doing things. We want to make sure that for all of the gifts that you've given us, that we're putting them to the use that you want. So we remind us to come to you and ask what you want us to do with the gifts that you have given us. Speak loudly and clearly to us, Lord. We thank you so much. We thank you so much for all that you've done for us and all you continue to do and the blessings. This is a season of harvest and all of the blessings that are coming in. We're in the harvest season. We are in the harvest. We're at the end times and we're in the harvest season. And we thank you so much for that. What a great holiday to remember that we're celebrating that time. Lord, we love you and we thank you. And we only want to remain holy to you, and using the sword of the Spirit, severing those ties from anyone or anything that's not aligned with you, so that we are only remaining with you. In your precious, precious name. Amen. Bye, everyone. And you have a blessed time. And again, go out and celebrate and have fun with the time of the harvest and the season. Thank you so much. And next week, we will be looking at the last of our high holy days. Shalom, everyone. Bye.